Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group, attorneys serving you since 1978, 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. Nate McPherson, good friend of mine. 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's BEAT. IRS serving all your tax needs. Dr. Jay Richards is on the line. Dr. Jay Richards is the executive editor, co-founder of The Stream. He's an assistant research professor in the School of Business and Economics at the Catholic University of America, senior fellow at the Discovery Institute. He's previously served as a contributing editor at the American Enterprise Institute and was a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He's been on this program before. Dr. Jay Richards, thank you so much for being with us on the Joe Miller Show.
My pleasure. Great to be with you, Joe.
You published an article in FoxNews.com. Could Pope Francis's U.S. visit change his mind about capitalism? We put up a number of stories about the Pope and whether or not he really is a supporter of socialism, whether he's anti-capitalistic. Give us a little bit of background, your assessment of where the Pope is on economics.
Absolutely. Joe, I've read virtually everything I can find on what the Pope's written, what he talks about these things. I think the easiest way to summarize him is he's a moderate Peronist. That is, he was born and raised in Argentina under the shadow of Juan Perón. Peronism was not socialism. It's what's called corporatism. So it's essentially an economic system that tends to be opposed to the free market. It tends to be opposed to the sort of commercial class. And there's a lot of rhetoric about helping the poor and the common person. But what it really is a kind of an economic system in which you've got collusion between these large economic actors and a large intrusive state. So it's not socialism where there's, abolition of private property and government ownership of the means of production. It's cronyism, essentially. And so that's his experience. It's his life experience. He's never actually directly experienced an economy, even as free as the United States, directly. And so some have speculated because of that maybe his direct experience of the U.S., he's going to be here in D.C., just landed an hour or so ago, and then he's going to be in New York and in Philadelphia. Maybe this will give him a better sense of that. I'm a little skeptical that, driving by Times Square is going to suddenly turn him on to the virtues of capitalism, but I do hope listening to faithful Catholics, and I consider myself a faithful Catholic, who argue that, look, if you're concerned about the poor and lifting large numbers of people out of poverty, there is exactly one known way to do that, and that's a lot of economic freedom. And so that's the argument. Just look at the evidence that, it's not utopia, but a free market is the best thing going if we want to lift large numbers of people out of poverty.
Yeah, I mean, one of the comments that he made that really caused a lot of observers to be concerned about his approach to capitalism was his statement that money is, quote, the devil's dung, end quote, because it enslaves people, etc. I mean, was he just quoting a scriptural principle, or was he, again, reflecting kind of what he grew up in?
He actually didn't. I looked this up because there's so many stories. I looked at the exact quote, and when he's referring to the dung of the devil, he was actually talking about the idolatry of wealth. And so that's a very specific thing. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. It's not that money is the root of all evil. It's love of money is the root of all evil. And right. So there, what he said wasn't actually as bad as some of the things he said in his apostolic letter in 2013 called Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel, mostly about preaching the gospel, but there's 6 pages on economics where he talks about the bad ideas about trickle-down economics or supposedly help poor people, and he says, something critical about the invisible hand. He never uses the word capitalism, but it's clear there that he has in his mind at least the kind of arguments for the free market, and I think, he is sort of quite critical, though, as I said, that is not the sort of central theme of the document. And there's no evidence that I've been able to find that he's actually sort of engaged. It's not like he's been reading Hayek or Adam Smith or anything like that. And so he just doesn't know the arguments. And the advisors that he has around him, many of them from Latin America, also have absolutely no idea what the sort of case for the free market is. So I honestly think it's the job of faithful Catholic lay people who know this to try to press the case.
Part of my concern is that on a number of different issues, whether it be economics, whether it be the environment, global warming, whether it even be to a certain extent that the controversy over homosexual rights, that people will comment that the Pope is just simply, he's not grounded. He doesn't know. He's just listening to his advisors. You would think that in the selection process that the Pope candidate that was voted forward would have been somebody that, they would have thought had some foundation, had some real fundamental precepts grounded that wouldn't lead to then these type of questions that we have today. Is it that he really is kind of this blank sheet, that he is being influenced on all of these issues by advisors, that he isn't well grounded, or is it that he's been very effective in hiding who he is?
I think it's a mix of both. I mean, Joe, some of the things I'm talking about, I always go and read the actual document. If I can find a official Vatican translation, I read that, because from the moment he became Pope, there was a media script that, he's a new kind of liberal, progressive Pope, and he's going to change the things that were so awful under Benedict XVI. And so that story pre-existed his papacy, and so everything gets plugged into that. If you listen to his general audience, it's clear he is totally conservative and totally orthodox on marriage, on homosexuality, and all these questions. They just don't get reported, and so you get these sort of isolated statements. And so I'm really not that worried about him when it comes to things like marriage and homosexuality. I do think that he buys this sort of catastrophist line on global warming, and I do think in that case he is a victim of a very bad advisor, a German scientist named John Schellnhuber, this is the guy that said that the carrying capacity of the Earth is less than 1 billion people. He got put on the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, and so the Pope is just listening to him in that case. So when it comes to these economic and environmental questions, first of all, that's not the sort of core competence of the magisterium. Catholics don't believe that popes are infallible when they're talking about these sort of empirical questions. I think, he's got some bad advisors. When it comes to the core questions, as he said to the reporters today on the way to the U.S. from Cuba, he said, I'm not a liberal. Anybody that thinks I'm a liberal is misunderstanding me. I'm happy to recite the creed for you. In other words, when it comes to Orthodox Christianity, he defends and he affirms those things. He is, from an American perspective, sort of left of center on economic and environmental issues, and I frankly disagree with him on many of the things he says there, but I think it's important to keep that in context and not assume that he's sort of squishy on all these issues. He's sort of left of center on these questions, but they're secondary questions that, they're not in the Nicene Creed. Nicene Creed doesn't tell us what we should do with the minimum wage or how sensitive the climate is to CO2.
Right. And on family, which has also been one of these things that has concerned a number of people. Again, you don't have question about his perspective on traditional values, but there was an article that came out, I think, in the Wall Street Journal. You probably saw it. Mm-hmm. The Obama administration has lined up this guest list to be part of the welcoming group that includes transgendered, gay and dissident Catholics. I think even the first openly gay Episcopalian bishop. Right. There's a nun that advocated for Obamacare, etc. And Pope Francis's team apparently said, hey, we don't like this. I guess the concern was, again, the photo opportunities that would seem to reflect with them around him that he's endorsing, which again
That's
would
right. My
ahead.
worry was that they wouldn't say anything. I mean, it was clear that the president, of course, is going to do everything he can to co-opt Pope Francis. I mean, he was on the tarmac here at Andrews Air Force Base a couple of hours ago. He'll do everything he can. In this case, it's just it's discourteous that he would invite these obvious Catholic dissenters, and then they're publicizing those. There will actually be thousands of people on the South Lawn of the White House tomorrow, but we're not hearing about them. We're hearing about these people because I frankly think that the president and members of his team would love to sort of co-opt the Pope on that. Pope's not going to go south on those questions. I'm not the least bit worried about that. He's really here to go to the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia this weekend. That was the sort of second reason that he came. The first reason is this canonization mass tomorrow at Catholic University for Junipero Serra. This is a specifically theological event. There'll be 25,000 people. I'll be one of them that'll be there for that. That's why the Pope came. And then what happened is all these kind of sort of side trips to, as it turns out, the joint session of the U.S. Congress, and then, of course, to the General Assembly of the United Nations. And so these sort of major political events are the things everybody is watching, but those are actually secondary to the reason for his trip initially.
Let's talk a little bit about foreign policy. I mean, the Vatican has come under fire, the Pope himself, for statements regarding Palestinians and the right to self-determination, of course, the issue of whether or not they should be able to claim their sovereignty. You have any thoughts on the Pope and whether or not he's really taking a different line from the past Vatican line on the Palestinian issue?
He's not actually. That's funny, and I'm not all that pleased with the line that's been taken. But what happened with the sort of development that was announced here a couple of months ago with respect to the Palestinians is actually something that has been in the works for, I think, about 15 years, since John Paul II was in the papacy. So that's how long this has been going on. It just sort of finally came to fruition when Pope Francis is in the office. So it wasn't actually anything that he's dealing with. It's not a disavowal of Israel itself. I think you could sort of disagree with the sort of long-term wisdom of that, but I don't place the blame for that, as you will, on Pope Francis' shoulders at all.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Jay Richards, executive editor and co-founder of The Stream, with us talking about the Pope. We'll get this podcast up so you can take a listen to it. Dr. Richards, thanks for being with us again on The Joe Miller Show.
Thank you, Joe.